Imagine coming home on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. You drop your keys on the counter. You set your bag by the door. And then, almost without thinking, the way you always do, the way you have done every single day for as long as you can remember, you look toward the fireplace mantel, because that is where she lives. That is where she has always lived. A 6-year-old girl in a photograph, arms wrapped around her mother's waist, both of them laughing so hard the camera caught them mid-motion. Her mother in a yellow summer dress with tiny sunflowers stitched along the hem. Two people who loved each other so completely that even a frozen moment in time could hold all of it. That photograph was not decoration. It was not clutter. It was the last solid, tangible, physical proof that a woman named Samantha had existed, that she had been here, that she had loved her daughter. And that Tuesday afternoon, when Selena Carter walked through the front door of her father's house and looked toward that mantel, the frame was gone. The clean rectangle of wood where it had sat for years stood out like a wound. Selena stood very still. She did not panic. She did not cry out. She simply stood there and looked at the empty space. And then she asked, in a voice that was quieter than it had any right to be, where the photo had gone. Her stepmother Linda answered from the other room without looking up. She said she had thrown it out. She said it was just an old frame with a faded picture. She said Selena was being dramatic. And then she suggested that maybe they should make a new one, with her in it instead. There was a silence in that house that lasted only a few seconds. But in those few seconds, something shifted. Something that could not be undone. Selena looked at the woman who had said those words, and she spoke very quietly. She said, "You have no idea what you have just done, but you are going to regret it. This is a story about grief, about the things we hold on to when someone we love is taken from us, and about what happens when someone else decides those things do not matter. It is a story about a photograph, a hidden envelope, a woman in a silk robe digging through a city garbage dump, and a letter written by a dying mother to a woman she had never met. But more than any of that, it is a story about what it costs to erase someone, and about the price that Linda paid for believing she could. Before we get into the full story, let me lay out for you exactly what we are going to cover in this video, because there are 3 questions at the center of everything that happened in that house, and every single one of them deserves a proper answer. The first question is this: what was inside the frame that sent Linda speeding to the city dump in her silk robe and slippers, without changing her clothes, without calling ahead, without a plan? What was so valuable, or so threatening, that a grown woman was willing to dig through mountains of garbage with her bare hands just to get it back? The second question is, why did Selena smile? Because she did. Barely visible, almost imperceptible. But it was there. A quiet satisfaction in her eyes as she watched the panic settle into Linda's face. Was it revenge? Was it calculation? Or was it something more complicated than either of those things? And the third question, the one that will stay with you long after this video ends. What happened to this family when the truth finally came out? What was in the envelope? And was it enough to save a marriage? Or did it end one? Stay with me. Every answer is coming. But first, you need to understand who these people were. Because nothing that happened that Tuesday makes sense unless you know the full story. And the full story begins, as so many stories do, with a woman who left too soon. And before we go any further, if you are watching this right now, we would love to know where in the world you are joining us from. Drop your city or state in the comments below. We read every single one. And if you have not already, please hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, let us get into this. Samantha Carter grew up in a small town outside of Nashville, Tennessee. She was the kind of woman people describe the same way every time. Warm. And that was always the first word. Warm. Not beautiful, though she was. Not smart, though she absolutely was that too. Warm. She had a laugh that started somewhere deep and worked its way out slowly, and once it arrived, It pulled everyone in the room with it. She married Robert Carter in the summer of 1994 in a backyard ceremony with mason jars full of wildflowers and a borrowed white dress that she altered herself. They moved to a suburb of Charlotte, North Carolina, Ike into a house with a covered porch and a magnolia tree in the front yard. And for a few years, life was exactly as good as they had hoped it would be. Selena was born in 1998. She came into the world on a Wednesday morning in October, and Robert would later say, and say it every chance he got, that the moment Samantha held her, the whole room changed. Something settled. Something that had been searching found its place. Samantha was 31 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. And for the next 2 years, the three of them built something beautiful in that house in Charlotte. Sunday morning pancakes with blueberries from the farmer's market, a garden out back that Samantha tended with more enthusiasm than skill, a family photograph on the mantelpiece that got updated every year. Selena's first steps, her first Halloween costume. A sunflower, because that was Samantha's favorite. Her first words. All of it documented. All of it celebrated. All of it held. And then, not in the spring of 2001, when Selena was 2 years old and the magnolia tree out front was in full bloom, Samantha found a lump. She was 33. The doctors were thorough, and then they were grave, and what they told her changed the shape of everything. It was breast cancer, aggressive and already advancing. They talked about treatment options and timelines and statistics. Samantha listened to all of it the way she did everything, with her full attention and without falling apart in front of anyone. She went home, and she held her daughter, and she made a decision. She was going to fight, and she was going to fight hard. And for 2 years, she did exactly that. What those 2 years were like inside that house in Charlotte is something that Robert has never been fully able to describe in words. He has tried. In the years since, he has sat with family members and with therapists and with himself in the quiet hours of the night, and he has tried to put language around what it felt like to watch his wife, the warmest person he had ever known, slowly lose ground. Chemotherapy, radiation, good days where she was almost entirely herself, laughing in the kitchen, wearing her favorite yellow sundress because she said the color made her feel like she was refusing to give up. And bad days. Days when she could not get out of bed. Days when the house was very quiet, and Selena would sit outside the bedroom door and draw pictures with her crayons and slide them underneath it, one at a time, so her mother would have something to look at. Selena was 4 when the illness began and 6 when it ended. She would grow up with only fragments of clear memory from those years. The smell of her mother's perfume, vanilla and lavender, drifting through the hallway at night. In the specific weight of being held. The yellow dress with the sunflower hem, which she associated so completely with her mother, that for years afterward she could not see the color yellow without her throat tightening. And the photograph. Taken in the summer of 2003, a few months before Samantha died, by Robert on an old Canon camera in the backyard. Selena, 6 years old, arms thrown around her mother's waist, both of them laughing at something just out of frame. Samantha in the yellow sundress, mid-motion, caught between one moment and the next. It was not a posed photograph. It was not perfect. It was better than perfect. It was real. Samantha Carter died in the fall of 2003. She was 35 years old. Selena was 6. Robert was 38. And the man who came out the other side of that grief was recognizably the same person who had gone in. Same kind eyes, same steady hands, but quieter. Hollowed in a way that never fully filled back in. He did what good fathers do. He showed up. He made breakfast and packed lunches and went to school plays and sat through pediatric dentist appointments and helped with homework at the kitchen table. He kept the house on. He kept the lights on. He kept himself on. But anyone who knew him well enough could see the edges of the absence. The way he would sometimes stop in the middle of a sentence and look at something in the middle distance that nobody else could see. And the way the house held Samantha in every room. Her books still on the shelves, her coffee mug still in the cabinet, the photograph still on the mantel, and how Robert never moved any of it. Selena grew up in a house that was full of love and full of grief in equal measure. She and her father did not talk about Samantha as often as perhaps they should have. Grief in families can work that way. It becomes a room that everyone knows is there and nobody goes into. Because going into it means acknowledging everything you lost, and sometimes that is more than you can carry on an ordinary Tuesday. But the photograph on the mantel was always there. It was the thing that did the talking when words were too hard. It was proof. And for Selena, who was only 6 when her mother died, and whose memories of her were already softening at the edges the way childhood memories do, that photograph was everything. It was the one place where Samantha was completely herself. Laughing, real, present, wearing that yellow dress that smelled like sunshine and fabric softener, and a perfume that Selena could still sometimes smell in her dreams. Robert Carter did not date for years after Samantha's death. He went on a few dinners in the year she had been gone for 5 years, at the insistence of friends who meant well. Nothing came of them. He was not ready, and he knew it. And he was honest about it in a way that people appreciated even if it frustrated them. Then, in 2010, 7 years after Samantha died, he met Linda Marsh at a company event in downtown Charlotte. She was 42. He was 45. She was bright and put together and confident in a way that made a room pay attention. And she laughed at something he said across a conference table, and that was how it started. They dated for 2 years. Selena, who was 12 when they met, it was polite and distant in the way that children of grief learn to be. Not hostile, not warm, but guarded. Watching. Reserving judgment the way you reserve a seat for someone you are not sure you want to sit next to. Robert and Linda were married in 2012. Selena was 14. The wedding was small, a courthouse ceremony followed by a dinner at a restaurant on the waterfront, attended by close family and a handful of friends. In the photographs from that day, Selena is smiling in the way teenagers smile at events they have agreed to participate in without fully consenting to them emotionally. She wore a blue dress. She held her father's arm during the photographs. She was civil to Linda, and Linda was civil to her. And for the first few months of the marriage, the house operated on a kind of careful, managed peace. Everyone was trying, or at least everyone appeared to be. But Linda and the house were never quite aligned, because the house still held Samantha. Her books, her mug, the photograph on the mantel. And Linda looked at all of it and saw something she did not know how to make peace with. The changes Linda made to the house happened gradually, the way most things that matter happen. Not all at once, but in increments that are small enough on any given day to seem reasonable. The curtains in the living room were replaced in the first month because Linda said they were too dark and let in no light. And that was fair enough. The kitchen was repainted from a soft sage green to a crisp white in the 3rd month, and Selena came home from school to find her mother's favorite color gone from the walls. But she said nothing because it was, after all, just a wall. A set of Samantha's books that had lived on the hallway shelf for 9 years were boxed up and moved to the attic in the 5th month because Linda wanted to put a mirror there, and Robert nodded and carried the box upstairs. And Selena watched him do it from the top of the staircase without saying a word. Each change, individually, was defensible. Collectively, they amounted to something that felt like erasure. Selena was 16 by the time the marriage had been going for 2 years, and she had grown into the kind of quiet that has volume in it. She was not a difficult teenager in the traditional sense. She did not slam doors or pick fights or stay out past curfew. No, she was studious and self-contained, and she watched everything with the particular attention of a person who has learned early that the people you love can disappear without warning. She watched Linda rearranging her mother's house. She watched her father defer again and again to keep the peace. She watched the slow, systematic removal of Samantha from the home Samantha had built. And she kept her counsel. She stored everything she observed in a place inside herself that was very still and very certain. and she waited. She would later say that she was not waiting for an opportunity to retaliate. She was simply waiting for the moment when she would need to act. She did not know in those 2 years of watching that the moment would arrive on a Tuesday afternoon when she was 17 years old. But when it did, she was ready. It was a Tuesday in March, 2 years into the marriage. Selena came home from school at around 3:30 in the afternoon, later than usual because she had stayed to work on a project in the school library. She came through the front door, set her backpack on the bench in the hallway, and did what she always did. She looked toward the mantel. It was a habit so deeply ingrained she was not even conscious of it most of the time. The way you check your phone when you sit down, or the way you look for the clock when you enter a room. Now she looked toward the mantel, and the frame was not there. The space where it had stood for 11 years, the space around which the entire living room was oriented, that she had looked at every single day of her life in that house, was empty. A clean, pale rectangle of paint on the mantel surface, slightly less faded than the wood around it, marked where the frame had been, and nothing else. Selena stood in the hallway for a moment. She was very still. And then she walked into the living room and she looked at the empty space from every angle, as if there were some possibility that the frame had simply moved somewhere else in the room and she had missed it. It had not. She called out for Linda. Linda answered from the kitchen, cheerful and unbothered, asking if Selena wanted something to eat. Selena walked to the kitchen doorway. Linda was rearranging a new set of decorative plates on the counter. It's the kind of activity that requires concentration and holds it, and she barely glanced up when Selena appeared. And Selena asked, in a voice that was steady and completely controlled, where the photograph was, the one that had been on the mantel. Linda set down a plate, turned slightly, thought for a moment, and said, "Oh, that old thing." I threw it out, and then she turned back to her plates. There are moments in a person's life that divide cleanly into before and after. Not because of what was said or done in those moments, necessarily, but because of what they reveal. What Linda revealed in those 4 words, that old thing, was everything Selena had been observing for 2 years, finally made explicit. Not hidden behind the language of interior design or moving forward or fresh starts. Just that old thing. Her mother's face, the last photograph taken of them together. The only image in the world of Selena at 6 years old, arms around her mother's waist. Both of them mid-laugh in the golden afternoon light of a summer that would turn out to be their last one together. That old thing. Selena stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at her stepmother, and something inside her went very quiet in the way that things go quiet just before they become very loud. She said it back. She made Linda say it again. "You threw it out?" And Linda, still not looking up from her plates, confirmed it. And then she added, "And this is the part that people who know this story always point to as the sentence that changed everything." She suggested that Selena should make a new photo, with her in it. The implication could not have been clearer. The old photograph was unnecessary because the old subject was gone. There was a new woman in this house now. Time to update the record. Selena stood there in the doorway for a moment that everyone who has heard this story agrees must have felt very long. And then she said, quietly, and without any heat in her voice at all, "You have no idea what you have just done, but you are going to regret it." Linda laughed. She asked if she had just thrown away some kind of holy relic. And Selena looked at her directly, and she said, "Dad hid an envelope behind that photo. It was meant for you. He told me it was a surprise that would change your life. He put it there because he thought you would not find it until your birthday." What happened next happened fast. You could see it on Linda's face. The sequence of it. First, the disbelief. She did not believe Selena immediately, because Selena was 17 and could be making it up, and Linda was not a woman who responded well to the suggestion that she had made a catastrophic mistake. But then came the doubt, because what if she was not making it up? And then came the calculation. An envelope hidden behind a frame. A surprise from her husband. something that would change her life. He had been so deliberate about it, she thought, tucking it there, keeping it secret. Robert was not a dramatic man. If he had said it would change her life, he had meant it. And she had thrown it in a trash bag with decorative pillows and old magazines and taken the bag to the curb, and the garbage truck had come that morning. And if Robert's surprise was in that bag, then it was in that truck. And if it was in that truck, then it was at the city dump. She did not stop to change her clothes. She was wearing a silk robe, the kind of thing you wear on a slow Tuesday morning when you have nowhere to be, and a pair of slippers. She grabbed her car keys from the hook by the door. She went through the garage. She got into her SUV. She reversed out of the driveway at a speed that the neighbors would later describe as somewhat alarming. And she drove, in her silk robe and slippers, toward the city of Charlotte's municipal waste processing facility. Selena stood in the living room and watched the SUV disappear down the street, and then she sat down on the couch, and she waited. She knew exactly how long it would take. She had already calculated it. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg Solid Waste Facility is not a small place. It receives hundreds of tons of residential garbage every week, and on a Tuesday in March, it is operating at full capacity. With trucks arriving and depositing loads and the whole vast mechanical process moving without pause or ceremony. Linda arrived there in her SUV at approximately 4:15 in the afternoon. She told the attendant she was looking for a bag of items that had been thrown away by mistake. The attendant explained, with the particular patience of someone who fields exactly this kind of request more often than you might expect, that once items were deposited at the facility, they were processed and compacted, and there was no practical way to retrieve specific bags. Linda explained that she understood all of that, but she would very much like to try anyway. The attendant, after a brief and quietly bewildered conversation, directed her to speak with a supervisor. The supervisor also explained that retrieval was not practical. Linda said she understood and would like to begin looking immediately. What followed was 2 hours that Linda would never, in any version of events, choose to repeat. The facility has sections where recently arrived residential loads are staged before compaction, and it was in these sections that she searched. In a silk robe, in slippers. With her bare hands, she found household trash in volumes that the human nose is not designed to process at close range. She found things she could not identify and did not want to. She found, at one point, what appeared to be her own trash bag and opened it with shaking hands, only to discover it was someone else's. She kept looking. The afternoon light changed. The smell did not improve. At some point, a facility worker offered her a pair of work gloves, which she accepted. She kept looking. She was, by all accounts, looking with the intensity of a person who has a great deal to lose. And that intensity tells you something important about what she believed was in that envelope. She came home at approximately 6:15 in the evening. Robert's car was in the driveway. He had come home from work to find Selena sitting alone in the living room and the SUV gone. And Selena had explained, in the measured, factual tone she had been practicing all afternoon, what had happened. She had told him about the missing photograph. She had told him about Linda's response, and she had told him what she had said to Linda in return. Robert sat in the living room with his daughter, and he said very little while she talked. His face did not move much, but the stillness in it was the particular stillness of a man who is listening to something that is rearranging things he thought were settled. He was still sitting in the living room when Linda's SUV pulled into the driveway. He was still sitting there when the front door opened, and then Linda walked in. She was unrecognizable. The silk robe was soiled beyond any reasonable hope of salvage. Her hair, which she kept carefully styled as a matter of personal practice, was tangled in a way that suggested she had been doing something involving wind and struggle and no mirror. Her hands and forearms were dirty. There was a smell about her that filled the room immediately upon her entrance, the way the smell of a landfill does, pervasive and absolute and not at all subtle. She was carrying something, a frame, torn, bent, smeared with the particular dark mud of a garbage facility. She set it on the floor of the living room, or rather she dropped it, because her arms seemed to need to be free of it. And then she looked at Robert, and she said, with a volume that was entirely disproportionate to the quiet of the house, "How did you dare?" Robert looked at his wife for a long moment. He looked at the destroyed frame on the floor. He looked at the photograph still faintly visible through the cracked, unmuddied glass, the image of his daughter and his first wife, both laughing, caught forever in a single afternoon of their life together. And then he looked at Linda, who was waiting for an explanation, waiting for Robert to account for whatever surprise he had hidden in the frame that she had come home empty-handed after spending 2 hours searching for in a garbage dump. And he asked her a question instead of answering hers. He asked her, "Did you throw away Samantha's photograph?" The question was quiet, not angry, not yet. Something more measured than anger. The question of a man who wants to be very clear on the facts before he decides how to feel about them. Linda said that she had. She said it had been cluttering the mantel and she had wanted to refresh the space. She said she had not thought it was a big deal. She said Selena had been dramatic about it. She had moved quickly through all of these statements, stacking them up between herself and Robert's expression, and which was not softening the way she needed it to. And Robert, who was a man who did not often raise his voice and who did not raise it now, told her that the photograph was the only image of Selena with her mother that had lived in this house for 11 years. That it was the last photograph taken of them together before Samantha died. That Selena had looked at it every day since she was 6 years old. And that throwing it away without asking, without consulting him, and without a single conversation, was not refreshing a space. It was something else. He did not give it a name right then, but the name was there in the room with them and everyone could feel it. And then Robert picked up the ruined frame from the floor. He turned it over carefully in his hands. The backing had been partially dislodged from Linda's earlier attempts to inspect it. She had, after all, gone looking for the envelope once she retrieved the frame from the garbage facility, and finding it still attached to the backing had sent her home. Robert pressed the backing aside, and there, tucked into the space between the photograph and the backing of the frame, was an envelope. Damaged at one corner. Slightly damp, but sealed. Still sealed. The contents still protected by the frame that had survived the dump because it was heavier than the surrounding trash and had landed at the bottom of a partly covered load and been sheltered from the worst of it. Aunt Robert held the envelope and looked at it for a moment. Linda was watching him with an expression that had moved past anger into something raw. Something that looked, if you were reading it carefully, like fear. She asked him what it was. He did not answer immediately. Selena, who had been in the living room this entire time, standing by the doorway, said nothing. She had said what she needed to say that afternoon. The rest of this was no longer hers to control. Though Robert sat down on the couch with the envelope in his hands and he was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet that settles over a person when they are deciding something, not when they are already decided. And then he looked at Linda and he asked her if she remembered, when they first started dating, what he had told her about the kind of man he was trying to be. She did not answer. He asked her if she remembered the conversation they had had before the wedding about Samantha, and about what it meant that she had been his wife and Selena's mother, and that her memory deserved space in this house. Linda said she remembered, and Robert said, "Then you know what I need to say before I open this." What he said was this. 3 months before the wedding, he had gone to the attic to bring down a box of his and Samantha's things. Photographs, mostly, and some letters, and a few keepsakes that he had stored there after she died. He was going through them, he said, because he had been feeling guilty, not about marrying Linda, about the possibility that in marrying Linda he was somehow moving away from Samantha, betraying the memory of a woman who had given him everything. He had been sitting on the attic floor going through the box when he found something he had forgotten was there. A letter. Handwritten, on the notepaper Samantha had kept in the nightstand. Dated in the last month of her life. Addressed to no one in particular. Or rather, to anyone. To whoever came next. Samantha had known, in those final weeks, that Robert was young enough to love again. She had known him well enough to know that he would. And she had written, in the months before she died, a letter to the woman who would someday stand where she could no longer stand. Robert had read the letter in the attic, and he had cried in a way he had not cried since the funeral. And then he had made a decision. He wanted Linda to have that letter. Not as a gesture of sentimentality, and not as a warning, as a gift. Because what Samantha had written in those pages was grace. Pure, remarkable, absolutely characteristic grace. The letter was an act of such love and such generosity that Robert had decided it belonged to Linda. That it was something Linda needed to read before she could fully understand what she was walking into when she married him. He had tucked it behind the photograph on the mantel, behind Samantha's face, because it felt right to keep them together until the time came. He had planned to give it to her on her birthday, in a month's time. He had told no one about it except Selena, in a moment of wanting to share something beautiful with his daughter. He had asked Selena to keep the secret. She had. Until the afternoon, the photograph disappeared, and the secret was the only tool she had. Robert opened the envelope, and the letter had survived the dump the way the frame had survived it. Sheltered, sealed, a little damaged at the margins, but the core of it intact. He unfolded the pages carefully. There were two of them, written front and back in Samantha's handwriting, which Selena recognized from across the room the way you recognize something you have known your whole life. She had seen her mother's handwriting on birthday cards she had found in boxes in the attic, on grocery lists tucked inside old cookbooks, on a note that lived in Robert's wallet, folded into a small square, that he had never shown Selena, but that she had once glimpsed the edge of and recognized. The handwriting of a woman who had been very thorough about leaving traces of herself behind. Robert held the pages and he read. The room was very quiet. Linda had sat down on the far end of the couch. Selena had not moved from the doorway. Outside, yes, the neighborhood was making its ordinary evening sounds. A dog somewhere, a car in the distance, the specific quality of suburban quiet that falls just before dark. And then Robert looked up from the pages. His eyes were wet. Not crying, not fully, not yet. But wet with the particular effort of a man who is holding something together that very much wants to come apart. He said, "She wrote it to you, Linda." And then, without reading it aloud, he handed it to her. Linda took it. Her hands, which had been muddy when she came in and were now cleaned but still stained at the knuckles, were not entirely steady. She looked at the first line of the letter, and then she kept reading. And the room watched her read it. And what crossed her face as she read it was not what anyone in that room had been expecting. It was not defensiveness. It was not calculation. It was something more vulnerable and more honest than either of those things. It was, if you were reading it carefully, the face of a woman who was understanding something for the first time. The letter began simply. Samantha had written, "If you are reading this, then Robert found the courage to love again. I knew he would. That is the kind of man he is, and I want you to know that I am glad." She had written about Robert, about the specific, particular goodness of him, the way he showed up for the people he loved without being asked, the way he noticed small things and held them carefully. She had written about it not as a woman introducing a man to a stranger, but as a woman entrusting something precious to someone she hoped was worthy of it. And then she had written about Selena. This is the part that Robert had cried at in the attic. This is the part that Linda now, with mud still on her knuckles and her ruined robe still on her body, began to cry at. Samantha had written, "My daughter is the best thing I have ever done. She carries grief the way the strongest people carry it, quietly, and without making anyone else responsible for it. But she needs someone to see it, not to fix it, not to replace me, just to see it and to honor it, and to make sure she knows that loving her father does not have to mean erasing her mother." Samantha had written, I will not be there to teach her how to be a woman. I will not be there for her first heartbreak or her graduation or the day she gets married or any of the 10,000 ordinary days between now and then that matter more than any of the big ones. I cannot be there, but you can. And I am not asking you to be her mother. She has a mother, even if her mother is gone. I am asking you to be someone who makes space for that. Someone who keeps the photographs on the wall. Someone who does not ask her to move on before she is ready. Someone who understands that grief does not follow a schedule and love does not require permission. I am asking you to take care of my daughter, not for my sake, for hers. She is worth taking care of. I want her to know that the world is full of people who see that. Linda finished reading the letter. The room was silent for a long time. Then she folded the pages carefully. Not quickly, not carelessly, but with the precision of someone who has just understood that what she is holding matters. And she set them on the couch beside her. And she looked at Selena. Not at Robert. At Selena, who was still standing in the doorway and who had not moved, and whose expression was doing the complicated thing that it had been doing all evening. Controlled, watchful, not giving anything away until she knew what it was safe to give. Linda said, "I did not know." Those 3 words. I did not know. And Selena said nothing. Because what Linda meant was not just that she had not known about the letter. She meant that she had not known what she was taking when she took that photograph off the mantel. She had looked at it and seen a faded image in an old frame, competition from a dead woman, something to be cleared away in the process of making this house hers. She had not known it was a child's last anchor to her mother. She had not known it was the thing Selena looked at every single day to remember that Samantha had been real. She had not known any of it because she had never asked. And not asking had cost her more than 2 hours at a garbage dump. There is a concept that grief researchers use when they talk about the particular losses that stepchildren experience. They call them secondary losses. The primary loss is the death itself, the parent who is gone. And the secondary losses are everything that comes after, the family structure that changes, the home that gets redecorated, the traditions that get discontinued, the photographs that come down from the walls. Each secondary loss is smaller than the first, but they accumulate. And what makes them devastating is that they are often avoidable. They happen not because of malice, but because of a failure of imagination. A failure to ask what this object, this tradition, this photograph means to the person who has already lost everything else. Linda had been in this house for 2 years. She had never once asked Selena what the photograph meant. She had looked at it and seen something she wanted removed. She had never looked past the frame to the child who needed what was in it. Robert opened the frame carefully. The glass was cracked, the backing was bent, the wood of the frame itself was damaged in several places. But the photograph, the actual image, as the paper print of a 6-year-old girl and her laughing mother in a yellow sundress, was intact. It was creased at one corner and slightly damp at the edges, but the image itself was completely clear. You could see every detail, the specific way Selena had pressed her face against her mother's side, the motion blur of the yellow dress, Samantha's hand coming up to cup the back of her daughter's head, both of them mid-laugh at something just outside the frame, both of them absolutely and completely present in that moment in the way that people are present only when they are not thinking about anything except the person beside them. The photograph had been taken in the summer of 2003, and it had survived 11 years on a mantelpiece and a trip to a Charlotte garbage facility, and it was still completely whole. Robert set the photograph carefully on the mantel. Not in the broken frame, just the image itself, there leaning against the wall in the space where it had always been. And then he sat down, and he looked at Linda, and he said what needed to be said, which was not a speech and not a verdict, but simply a very clear statement of what was going to happen next. He said, "The photograph stays." He said, "We are going to get it properly repaired and restored and put back in a frame, and it is going to live on this mantel for as long as this is my house." He said, And if there are other things of Samantha's that have been moved or removed in the last 2 years that need to come back, we are going to have that conversation. Linda did not argue with any of this. She looked at the photograph leaning against the wall, at Samantha's laughing face, at her daughter's arms around her waist. And she did not argue. She said, "I understand." And this time, she meant it differently than she had meant things before. The apology came the next morning. Selena had gone to her room the night before without speaking to Linda, and Linda had let her go, which was the right instinct. You cannot rush an apology across a wound that size. The next morning, Selena came downstairs and found Linda sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the letter, Samantha's letter, in front of her. She had read it again, apparently. More than once. She looked up when Selena came in, and she said, "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Selena sat down, and Linda said the things that needed to be said, in the order in which they needed to be said. She said she was sorry for throwing away the photograph. She said she knew that sorry was insufficient for what it had meant, but she was saying it anyway because it needed to be said. She said she had been behaving, in this house, like a woman who needed to win something, and she was beginning to understand what she had been trying to win and why it was the wrong way to think about it. She said she did not expect forgiveness. She said she just wanted Selena to know that she had finally understood. Selena listened to all of this without interrupting. When Linda finished, Selena was quiet for a moment. And then she said something that surprised Linda, and that Selena herself has said she did not entirely plan. She said, "My mother asked you to take care of me." She said it flatly, like a statement of fact, like someone laying down a card. She was not saying it as an accusation. She was saying it as a proposition, as if she were putting on the table something that had been agreed to in advance, by Samantha, in a letter written before Linda had even entered the picture, and asking whether Linda intended to honor it. There was a silence. And then Linda said, "I know, and I am going to try to do that." Selena looked at her for a moment, and then she said, "Okay, that was it. Not forgiveness, not yet, not warmth. Just, okay, an opening. And the smallest possible crack in a wall that had been building for 2 years. But a crack." Robert took the photograph to a professional photo restoration service the following week. They did excellent work. They repaired the crease at the corner, corrected the slight water damage at the edges, and printed a new version at a larger size than the original. They found a frame that matched the character of the original. Simple, warm-toned wood, nothing elaborate. When it came back, Robert put it on the mantel himself. It was slightly larger than before, more visible. The image was clearer than it had ever been. The color more vivid, the detail sharper. Samantha's yellow dress almost luminous against the summer green of the backyard. Selena came downstairs the evening it went back up and stood in the living room and looked at it for a long time without saying anything. And then she went to her room. Robert, watching from the hallway, and said it was the most settled she had looked in 2 years. Linda never asked for the photograph to be moved again. Not once, in all the years that followed. She has said, in the version of events that she tells now, that reading Samantha's letter was the most important thing that happened to her in that marriage. Not the wedding, not the honeymoon, not any of the good things that came before or after. The letter from a dead woman she had never met, written with the kind of grace that most people never manage while they are alive, telling her exactly what was asked of her and exactly why it mattered. She said it was the first time she had understood what kind of house she was living in. Not Robert's house, and not a house to be made her own. A house where Samantha had also lived. Where Selena had been born into the knowledge of her. Where grief and love and presence and absence all occupied the same rooms at the same time. Not the way they do in families where someone important is gone. She said, "I did not know how to live in a house like that, and I should have learned before I started rearranging the furniture." Selena Carter is an adult now. She talks about this story the way people talk about things that shaped them but no longer define them, with clarity, with a kind of wry acknowledgement of the human absurdity involved, and without the raw edges that mark something still unhealed. She has said that the thing she is most grateful for, looking back, is that the photograph survived. Not the letter, though the letter mattered enormously. Not the confrontation, not the reckoning, not any of the things that came after. The photograph. The fact that the paper it was printed on was thick enough, the frame heavy enough, the garbage load arranged just conveniently enough, that the image of her and her mother on a summer afternoon in 2003 came back to her intact. And she has said, if it had been destroyed, if Linda had gone to the dump and come back empty-handed and the photograph had been truly gone, I do not know what I would have done. I do not know who I would have become. It was that close. And I think about that sometimes. She has also said something about the moment she told Linda about the envelope that is worth spending time on. People have called it revenge. People have called it a trap. People have called it brilliant. And people have called it cruel. And Selena has said that it was none of those things, or maybe all of them, but that is not actually the most accurate way to describe it. She said, I was not trying to punish her. I was trying to get my mother's photograph back. She had thrown it away, and I could see that she did not understand what she had done. And I knew that the only way to make her understand was to give her something to lose. There's something that she valued as much as I valued what she had taken. I gave her something to lose, and she went and lost it herself. I did not do that part. She did that part. All I did was tell the truth. There is something in this story that goes beyond the specific details of one family in Charlotte, North Carolina. Something that resonates with anyone who has lost a parent, or who has watched someone they love lose one, and then watched the world move on in ways that felt like an additional loss on top of the first. Grief researchers have written extensively about the phenomenon of secondary losses and about the particular cruelty of having someone else decide when you are done grieving. The research is consistent. Children who lose a parent do not move on from that loss in any clean or linear way. Yet the grief returns at every milestone. First day of high school, prom, graduation, first heartbreak, first job, wedding day. It returns in small moments too, completely without warning. The smell of a particular perfume, the sound of a laugh that resembles someone's, the color yellow on a summer afternoon. The photograph on the mantel was not clutter. It was infrastructure. It was part of how Selena managed a loss that was never going to fully resolve itself. When Linda looked at that photograph and saw something to be removed in the process of making a home her own, she was not being malicious in the way that movie villains are malicious. She was being thoughtless in the way that real people are thoughtless, not asking questions she should have asked, not imagining experiences she should have tried to imagine, not understanding the weight of what she was holding because she had never had to understand it before. What Samantha's letter did, Oz in the end, was give her that understanding. Not through accusation or argument, but through the particular power of a woman speaking directly to another woman about what her child needed and why. It is very hard to be defensive against that. It is very hard to dismiss it or minimize it or reframe it as someone being dramatic. It is just a dying mother asking for something very simple. And most people, when they finally understand what is being asked of them, want to give it. There is one more thing about this story that matters, and it is the kind of detail that seems small until you realize it is the whole point. Samantha Carter loved the color yellow. She said it was the color of something that refused to give up. She wore it on her best days, the days when she was feeling most herself, most alive, most present in the world. She wore it on the day the photograph was taken, in the summer of 2003, a few months before she died. The yellow sundress with the sunflower hem. And she wore it, in the photograph, with the same quality she had always carried in it. Something luminous, something that leaned toward the light regardless of what the weather was doing. That photograph lived on the mantel for 11 years. It survived a garbage dump. It came back larger and clearer than it had been before. And it went back up on the mantel in the house where Samantha had lived, in the home she had built, near where her daughter was still learning what it meant to carry love and loss in equal measure. The yellow dress, still catching the light, still refusing to give up. Now that you know the full story, I want to go back to the question I asked you at the beginning. Not the questions about what was in the envelope or why Selena smiled or what happened to the marriage. You know all of those answers now. I want to ask you the harder question, the one that does not have a clean answer. Because here's what stays with me about this story. Samantha Carter, in the last months of her life, used some of her remaining energy to write a letter to a woman she would never meet. A woman who did not yet exist in her family's life. A woman who might, for all Samantha knew, turn out to be wonderful or terrible or something in between. She wrote to that unknown woman with grace and without bitterness and without conditions. She said, "I trust you with what I love most." She said, "Here is what my daughter needs." She said, "Please." And then she tucked the letter behind a photograph of herself and her daughter on a summer afternoon, and she let it go. That letter sat in that frame for 9 years before Robert found it in the attic box. It sat behind the photograph on the mantel for another 2 years after that, waiting for the birthday that would have been Linda's introduction to the full truth of what she had married into. And it almost did not survive. It came within a few inches, within the margin of where a garbage bag falls when it is dropped from the back of a truck, of being lost forever. No one would have known what was in it. No one would have known what Samantha had written. Robert would have given Linda something else for her birthday. The letter would have been gone. And this story would have ended differently. It would have ended with a photograph that could not be recovered and a family that could not find its way back to each other. It ended the way it did because a frame was heavy and a garbage load was arranged in a particular way on a particular Tuesday, and because luck, sometimes, is on the side of the things that deserve to survive. There is a conversation that happens in families after a loss, or there should be, that almost never does. It is the conversation about what things mean, but not what they are worth, not monetarily, not practically, but what they mean. The photographs, the pieces of jewelry, the books on the shelf, the color of the walls, the specific mug that someone always used on Sunday mornings. These things carry weight that is invisible to anyone who does not already know their story. And the tragedy of blended families, the very specific grief that stepchildren carry that is so often invisible to the adults around them, is frequently rooted in exactly this: the things that hold a parent's memory being removed by someone who did not know to ask what they meant. Linda did not know to ask, and by the time she learned the cost of not asking, the frame was already in a trash bag on the curb. This is why this story matters beyond the specific people in it. Because there are families all over this country, all over the world, where this exact dynamic is playing out right now. Where a child who has lost a parent is watching their home be remade by someone who does not understand what is at stake in every small change. Where photographs are coming down from walls without a conversation. Where the color of a room is being changed without anyone asking what that color meant to the person who chose it. Where grief is being managed on a schedule that belongs to the adults and not to the children. And where the children, like Selena, are watching all of it quietly and carrying it alone. If there is someone in your life in that position right now, if you know a child who is navigating a blended family after the loss of a parent, the simplest thing you can do is ask. Ask what the photograph means. Ask what the mug meant. Ask what the color of the walls meant. And then listen to the answer as if it matters, because it does. It matters more than you know. Before we close today, I want to hear from you. This story touches something that I think a lot of people carry quietly. Something about loss and memory and what we keep and what gets taken from us and whether the people who take it ever truly understand what they have done. I want you to tell me in the comments, have you ever lost something that someone else did not understand mattered? Not necessarily a photograph, not necessarily anything connected to grief. Just something that had a weight invisible to the person who took it or moved it or discarded it. Because I think that is one of the most common human experiences there is, and it almost never gets named. Tell me your story. Tell me in the comments below. Tell me where you are watching from as well. We love knowing where our audience is joining us from. Whether you are watching from a small town in the South or a big city in the Northeast, or somewhere entirely unexpected. Every comment matters to us, and we read every single one. And if this video moved you, if it made you think about the people you have lost and the things you keep to remember them, and the responsibility we all carry to honor what matters to the people around us, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you have not already subscribed to this channel, please do that now. We are here every week with stories like this one. Real, human, complicated, the kind that stay with you. Hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. We have so much more coming. And speaking of coming, I want to tell you about what we are covering next week. Because if you thought this story about a photograph and a hidden letter and a woman in a silk robe at a garbage dump was the kind of thing that keeps you awake at night turning it over in your mind, wait until you hear what we have coming. Next week, we are telling the story of a woman in suburban Ohio who discovered, on the day she came home early from work to surprise her husband for their anniversary, that the man she had been married to for 19 years was living a life she had never been given access to. Not an affair. Something more complicated than that. Something that would require her to rethink not just her marriage, but the entire architecture of the life she thought she had built. It is a story about trust and about the specific way that people who love us can still keep us in the dark about the things that matter most. And it starts, like all the best stories do, with something small. A door that was open just a little wider than it should have been. We will see you then. Stay well. And do not forget, some things in a house are not just things. They hold the shape of someone who is gone. Take care of them. Take care of each other.